Welcome to Emotionally Balanced with Dido Balla, where we make emotional regulation easy and accessible for you and everyone. Join me and my guests for real conversations and practical tools to help you navigate life's ups and downs with confidence, calm, and clarity. Welcome to Emotionally Balanced with Dido Balla. My name is Dido, your host. Today's guest is Dr. Caroline Henry, who's a good friend of mine. She's an educator, an innovator, a humanitarian who does amazing work at St. George University in Grenada. We have done a lot of good work together in mindfulness and education. And what I love the most about her is that she has a unique ability to break down emotional regulation on a personal and cultural level. During this episode, we talk about how going to the beach, using drums, moving, listening to waterfalls can all be ways you can regulate your emotions. And she taught me a new term. In the islands, when somebody's saying they're liming, it means that they're just like chilling, no plans, taking care of themselves and being present. And I can't wait for you to listen to this episode and take so many notes because she dropped so many gems. Enjoy the episode.
All right, we are officially live, and this is a funny one because before I pressed record, we were already getting deep into conversations, and I was like, let's pause and like actually start the podcast officially. So, Caroline, I love to call you Doc because you earned those letters. I am so grateful that you're here. I believe we met, like, I don't know if it's before or after COVID, but it feels like a really, really long time ago. And it was one of those encounters where it felt kind of random. And after the first conversation, it was obvious to me that I had met someone who was going to be in my life forever. And sure enough, right, whether we work together or when our separate ways and have found ways to partner,
Mm-hmm.
there have been so many opportunities for us to collaborate and to do some work together. So I'm just grateful to have you in my life. I'm grateful that you are here, and I thank you for saying yes to my invitation.
I am more than thrilled. The idea of partnership, the idea of finding like minded folks that you can share ideas and then create and deliver on those ideas. I think it's such a blessing. Your intro just now explained how that blessing became possible for you and for me. So it's just lovely to continue to have these dialogues and continue to do work that we find meaningful and that we're aligned around. So I'm excited about being here today and seeing where this conversation, where this dialogue takes us.
Okay, let's get into it. So the podcast is called Emotionally Balanced, which is a reference to the importance of learning how to regulate one's emotions. And this is something that is extremely important to me because in my life, I have observed that we don't control the things that happen to us. We have a lot less influence in the things around us that we believe. And what for sure we control somehow is how we respond to those things. And all of us do find ourselves in positions where we have done something or said something or acted out in a certain way, and then we regret it later. And I've always wondered, why is it that the same you, the same me,
Mm-hmm.
who said this to that person, who did this to that person, who did this to myself, is the same me who's not saying, oh, why did I do that? And as I reflected into that and learned about neuroscience, I realized that, well, it is still you, but the version of you that is dysregulated is taking actions, is saying things, is behaving in a way that does not always serve the best long-term goals that you have.
Yeah.
And when you are less dysregulated or when you are emotionally balanced, that version of yourself now has perspective. It can look and say, oh, well, why did I do that? Like, why did I say that? Why did I act that way? And when I discovered that, I just made it my life mission to try to understand that better, to try to learn how to shift from dysregulation to regulation myself and how to teach people how to do it because I feel like it's one of the most important, I call it superpowers that
Mm-hmm.
you can master yourself and teach other people. So That's what the goal of the podcast is. What's coming to your mind as you hear me describe these two states that can exist within the same human being when they
Yeah.
are dysregulated versus regulated?
I just think about the complexity of the human experience, right? I think we're fascinating creatures. I think we're very complex. We're complex because we have, these emotions that can be so raw, like you talked about. Um, and a friend of mine, we were talking a few weeks ago, and she was telling me about this book, something around why giraffes don't get ulcers. And I'm sure I'm misquoting that, but in any event, the idea that we do have this capacity to think and reason and mull over and go back is one of the things that allows us to think about our balance, that allows us to really reflect and say, okay, this unhinged behavior is behavior that is within my control. I don't have to go off the deep end, right? So in the complexity that is the human experience, we can insert ourselves to lead lives that are balanced. We can insert ourselves to lead lives that feel fulfilled as a result of pursuing that balance. At times it feels inescapable because so much is happening in the world and we have all these different identities that matter to us, right? As parents, as siblings, as all the identities, right? And we want those to that meaning that we attach to those identities. We want them to be felt and to be experienced. So we have visceral reactions, right? We have really, really deep visceral reactions when we feel at any time those are being squashed, they're being minoritized, they're being marginalized, right? And in the milieu of those complexities, we still have to insert ourselves to find balance, right? So we can have pause. When I think about it, Dido, from a kind of academic standpoint, I'm someone who's always been interested in sort of the behavior of humans and how it's juxtaposed to how we create societies, how we create spaces. So, from a sociological perspective, right, it's interesting to me, what we norm, um, what we what we give value to, what we attach value to, and I'm always one to pause. And I think it's one of the ways that we can not just lean into finding balance, but we can really sort of disrupt what feels like chaos at times, just to pause and give ourselves some breathing room. And I think that pause inevitably leads to calm, and so we get to operate from a more sort of prefrontal cortex perspective. And uh, you can then get to have conversations that come from a place of curiosity. I wonder, I know I may have felt this, but can you explain to me? Because we're sharing these spaces with our siblings, with our children, with our partners. And even in those spaces, we can pause, right? So I think that's an important part of how we can do this important work of showing up in our lives the way that we want to show up in our lives.
That's super helpful. And this idea of pausing is one that I want to dig a little deeper into. So, pausing may look like many different things. I want to get as practical as possible. So, somebody is listening right now who
Mm-hmm.
does not have any formal experience in mindfulness or breath work or understanding how the brain works. This is somebody who just like living their lives. They're dealing with the stress of just like trying to make ends meet or having struggling from the economical hardships around them. And they hear us talk about this idea of pause. So I want us to dig into what might that look like for someone who's living their life when they hear pause. Does this literally mean stop in your track before you say something? Does this mean literally stop moving? Does it mean catch the thought that was coming to your mind and pause that thought? Does it mean trying to interrupt the cycle between your sensations to your emotions to your thoughts to your actions, and then kind of pause somewhere there in between so you can actually reframe what is going on? Like, tell us a little more about what that idea of pause look like in real
Yeah.
life.
I think it can mean all of those things, right? I think all of those steps can be helpful when you find yourself overwhelmed, when you find yourself having a visceral reaction that is not positive. Joy is great. You feel that, smile a lot, hug a lot, do all the things where, that energy that's positive, you want to kind of get it out there. But when the energy that you're feeling creates a certain degree of unease and unrest, right? Where there isn't that calm, I think all of the steps that you mentioned are helpful, right? We've heard all the different, the adage around spilt milk, right? It's said you can't take it back. It's so much easier to say, I think I need a minute. I think I need a minute. Is it okay if we just pick this conversation up a little bit later? I think I need a minute. That's fine, right? Because what we don't want to do is just turn around and walk away, right? If we are in the midst of what feels like a tense conversation, we do want to acknowledge that it is tense, but give ourselves permission to pause. I think I need a minute. I've used this strategy. There's some who I think there's an analogy that's called rain. But essentially, you recognize that the energy that's coming towards you is a bit much. And in recognizing that, you say, it feels like this moment is a bit too much for me. I need a bit of a break. Can we take this up a little bit later? And it gives the other person permission to pause too, whoever that is, child, spouse, colleague. And when you are both now in the right space to have a conversation, you can then be productive in moving towards whatever it is was the point of contention or created that unease, that unrest, right? Ultimately, though, I think that in thinking about the pause, it doesn't have to just be within that minute. I think when we have a sense of what's important to us in our lives, pausing so that we can slow down to start our day with a slow morning, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
I would say is a way of pausing, not in the sense that here's a stop, but just taking things down a notch because they're so elevated, right? So how can we take it down a couple notches so that we can have a slow morning? For some, it may mean taking a sabbatical from work,
Mm.
right? So it really depends on where you are in your life, both personally and professionally, and recognizing that a pause is a beautiful way for you to disrupt what feels like chaos, what feels like overwhelming kinds of challenges in your life.
Wow, there's so much in there. So the pause disrupts the chaos. So, okay, so when I think about the way our societies function, we have this cultural addiction to rush and immediacy in wanting to either take action or see results. And it is almost at this point, I mean, I'm not qualified to say this, so I'm curious if this would even be considered a disorder. There's this, I don't even know how to describe this instinct to want to do everything right now. The second my phone like turns on or rings or I get a notification, it is it is almost I am physiologically not capable of not grabbing it and not responding. And I almost imagine somebody who has just sent me an email staring at me. They're like, "You really not gonna respond?" Like no matter
Yeah.
where they are, I really am. I feel their gaze. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh. So I have had to work so hard to slow down, even with like getting back to someone, right? And there's a time when I used to work at a place where my insomnia was leading to me entering emails at like 3, 4 a.m. And you know what? That was rewarded. It was
Hmm.
rewarded because when I did that, I did get brownie points. It did feel like, oh, I did was up late working. But so, and then you get the validation. And so your brain becomes wired to seek rewards
Yeah.
from being fast and quick and rushed. And so what we are uncovering right now is that this, I'm going to call it addiction to rush, is actually adversarial to the pause, to the slow down, to the being emotionally balanced, to the being emotionally regulated. So when I think about it that way, right, your concept of pause, therefore, as you said, it's not just the little pause of one moment. It can be, I'm going to pause by taking a month away from all these things, taking a day, taking an hour before I respond, saying, I'm going to get back to you. I need a minute. So the pause is just a way to acknowledge that we have this fascination with rushing, but
Hmm.
in fact, the rush is leading to the versions of ourselves which is dysregulated and therefore prioritizes speed over uh, being effective or efficient or loving, right? Like, what are the things that make you you? If you were to slow everything down, what are your values? I don't think anybody's value should be like speed. If it is, I'm sorry. If you think about your life values, you're gonna have things like loving, supportive,
Yeah.
kind, generous, compassionate, and none of those things go along with the hyper level of speed that we seem to be addicted to. So, listening to
Hmm.
you got me thinking about the fact that we're dealing with a lot. That makes it difficult to pause.
We are. We are dealing with a whole lot. I don't know that my parents and their parents, especially the part of the world that they grew up in, dealt with this breakneck, as we would say in the Caribbean, speed to get to whatever that finish line is, right? Um, Being on an island, living on an island now in Grenada, and having lived in the US for over 22 years, um, and I think Grenada is unique in that way, but I'm sure you will find it in other parts of the world. Um, that rush, you don't feel it as much. Um, Folks are their values around a quality life looks very different from what is juxtaposed, I would say, in more Western parts of the world, right? Parts of the world where business and capitalism maybe are at the forefront of what drives the way we value, and we decide that the goal has been met and the deliverable has been important, right? Um, so I think, it goes back to the individual ultimately. And when the individual can recognize that a quality life, if I were to think about my grandparents, for instance, or even my mother or my father, when I think about a quality life, it was a life, like you said, that was shared with people in a way that was really meaningful. It wasn't a quantified life, right? It wasn't that I got all these things done and here's the list and it's so long, yay, right? It was that you were able to show up in community and achieve things together. And back then, it might have been you're working in community to do things as simple as, creating access to your neighbor's property. That's a quality life.
Hmm.
I mean, to be able to support each other that way, to have that sense of togetherness where a community comes together. And there's a word that we use here, and I'm sure you'll find it in sort of African diaspora as well, where you have a maroon and everybody comes together. And so it is complex in the sense that you have competing values depending on where you live, but ultimately, it's the individual's prerogative to say, the connections matter to me, the
Mm,
community matter to me.
mm,
And as a result of that, and my desire to have a quality experience, I want to lean into, I want to invest in those ways of being. Um, and I think, I don't know what studies have been done around this, but I wouldn't be surprised if you find the kinds of health outcomes with folks who live that way far supersedes those of us who are going at breakneck speed to get to
mhm.
what we think is the finish line, right? And so, while you were talking, I couldn't help but think about a conversation I had with my 14-year-old where I read a message. Someone had texted me. I read a message and I just turned the phone back down. And she's like, you're just gonna, that is mean. She's like, you're not gonna respond, but they're gonna see that you read the message, right? They're gonna see that you read the message and you didn't respond. But her response was really interesting to me because I thought, and that's okay, right? But she was so alarmed that there wasn't that immediate reaction. And that's the world that she lives in. And that's the world I think that her generation, that way of communicating at that speed is what's being normed. Going back to what I said about earlier, it's interesting what we norm. But
Mhm,
ultimately, we have those choices, right? We have those choices. We have to be able to say, this may be what is done, but it's not what I need to do. It doesn't work for me. Giving ourselves permission, right? And I would say with anything, if you're trying to get to that moment of pause, you start you start slow, right? You identify one area in your life where you can insert this idea, right? This idea of pause.
mhm,
And as I would say with all things, being a researcher, monitor that.
mhm,
Observe what happens for that one area in your life, right? And you may find, oh wow, just deciding to have a slow morning, I'm noticing that my meetings and the way that I'm able to be present, I feel like it's a little bit different than what I was doing before, right? So just starting with just a small shift, you may find that it ripples out in bigger ways, right? And then from there, you may decide, hey, why don't I try it in these other areas of my life to see what the impact will be on the quality life that I want to have.
mm. So many good steps there. So first, we're asking folks to think about what they actually value in life as an individual, right? This is really important because the power of community is there. But before you can be part of an authentic community that makes sense for you,
Mm-hmm.
you need to get clarity around who you are, what makes you you, what makes you fulfilled. And I think part of slowing down is learning to know yourself better. And if you want a specific step by step on how to get to know yourself better, Caroline just said it. Become a researcher about your own life. Think about a typical day, typical week. What are those little things that tend to perhaps trigger you emotionally? And just start slow. If when I get an email, I get triggered, you know what? On Monday, I'm going to get the email, I'm going to read it and look away and just monitor to see how your heart rate starts going fast and see, right? If it's like when somebody cuts you off in traffic, you curse them out. Watch yourself and catch yourself. And I
Mm-hmm.
have one that anybody who is in the diaspora, most people, at least in my experience, like most immigrants, people who use WhatsApp. You guys use WhatsApp to text, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So
absolutely.
so check this out. So here's one that's been funny for me over the past years. So so WhatsApp has these notifications where when you text somebody, you can see if they received the message, and I guess you can see if they've read the message. Then you can also see if somebody's online. Now, I don't care about any of these things. When I text someone, I text them and I'm done. If and when they get back to me, they get back to me. Same thing when somebody texts me. I don't care when they texted me. It depends on what I'm going through. So people started calling me out. They would send me a text, then they would text me later, say, I can see you've read the message. Why haven't you responded? And I was like, what is going on here? So I went and I changed the setting on my WhatsApp so that what is it? Either you can't tell if I've read the message. I changed something. And
Mm-hmm.
then next thing you know, I'm hit with, I can tell you online. I can see you online. Why haven't you responded? I'm like, what is going on? Just because I'm online, at first I was like, I wasn't online. Like I was gonna lie about it. They were like, no, I can tell. I'm like, well, maybe I just had my phone in my hand. Like, no, I can literally tell
Yeah.
that you have WhatsApp open. I'm like, well, I don't know how you can tell that, but just because I have WhatsApp open doesn't mean I gotta text you back right now.
Correct.
You
Correct.
have
Correct.
no idea what I'm going through, why I'm on WhatsApp. But it took years
Wow.
for people to be okay with me just not texting them back when they wanted, when they could see me online. And I'm sharing that to say it took me years to be
Mm-hmm.
comfortable telling someone, sure, I'm online, but I text you when I text you. And it
Yeah.
feels uncomfortable, especially people from back home who are just like, no, but what do you mean? We don't do that. It almost came off as like rude. So
Yeah.
that's one for me. I wonder if you can relate in any way at all.
Yeah. No, it's. I think going against the grain, right, is hard, and the grain, as we know now, is immediacy, right? Like
Mhm.
right now, you get the text, respond. You get the email, respond. Like just be on. But that heightened state of being on, we know is just not healthy. The research supports that, right? Um, and so I think it's something, it's a decision that we have to make despite the discomfort. Um, I know for me, even in places that I've worked, and even now, I have a tagline at the end of my email, like when you can expect to get a response from me. And I think that is now normed in kind of the workspace. Even in, is it New Zealand or Australia? There's a law that was passed, the right to not be disturbed or something like that. So
Wow.
essentially, past the work hours, as an example, you don't expect an email. It's okay. Yeah, within the work hours, you can, because we know it follows us home. It's on our phones. It's everywhere, and the ways that we worked 50 years ago is very different than how we work now, as an example, right? We're
Hmm.
taking it home with us. We're working on papers, we're working on projects, and so forth and so on, right? And so again, trying to create a quality life for yourself means you have to establish the boundaries. And sometimes people get like a little bit icky when you start thinking about boundaries. What does that mean? But structure is important, right? Like structure is key. We can't build a house if we don't have proper structure. It'll
Hmm.
collapse. And it's the
Hmm.
same thing for our lives. We have to know, when the doors are open and when the doors need to be shut, so that we can preserve our well-being. And when that's done, the best version of ourselves show up in work, show up in life, and then we're really able to maximize our outcomes, right, and our potential. But the failure to do that ultimately is that we show up not authentically, we show up haphazardly, we show up with a reduced version of who we are, because we've allowed that chaos to sort of consume us or infiltrate us, and therefore we're just sort of existing within those constructs, right?
Hmm.
So the call here is to reclaim. I love this word reclaim. I love,
Hmm.
love, 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 love this word reclaim. Um, the call is to reclaim your identity within the spaces that you share. Reclaim that identity. So as a child, as a daughter, as a sibling, here's how I can show up. Here's what I can commit to. As a colleague, here's how I can show up. Here's what I can commit to, right? And once you have that sense of clarity, you can really honor yourselves and honor the quality of your relationships with the people that matter to you, work, or in a personal way, right? And so, yes, there is discomfort with, there is that eek, if you will.
Hmm.
But again, you think about what is possible, right? What is possible as a result of you showing up in that way and helping to construct a life for yourself that feels good, right? That feels not overburdened or stressed, which is ultimately what we experience when we decide to just sort of play the game and conform to what others have normed, right? We do have a say. We can disrupt it in this way.
Yeah, so on the topic of reclaiming, let's dig a little deeper into identity, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I'm 38. I was born in Cameroon. I have lived in Nigeria, Benin, Ghana. I moved to the States when I was, I think, 22, lived in Washington. Now I'm in Florida. Most people who grew up with me would feel very weird hearing me talk about, oh, emotional regulation and like, claim your peace and set your boundaries. And so that sounds great. But for someone with that kind of background, or I'm sure you can relate, being from Grenada and the islands, like there are a lot of people who are like, yeah, I don't know about all that, guys.
Mm-hmm.
That's not part of who we are. In fact, there's a perspective from which it is suspicious to to talk to such folks about emotion regulation. Like the big one was mindfulness, like what that is like white people stuff, they would say. And I really want you to talk about that a little bit, right? So this idea that you and I know that as
Mm-hmm.
human beings, the things that we're discussing are helpful for everyone. You have a nervous system, you have emotions, you want to claim an authentic, peaceful life. Everybody wants that. And the more you learn how to regulate your emotions, the more peaceful and accomplished your life can be. Any goals you want, you're more likely to achieve them if you have tools to regulate your emotions.
Yeah.
However, personal identity matters. And folks have often felt as if all these strategies and topics and conversations don't take into account who they are, especially when
Mm-hmm.
they come from where I come from and where you
Mm-hmm.
come from. So
Mm-hmm.
what do you say to that?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, and I'm not sure where that narrative came from. I don't know what the origin story is. Um, and if I were to reflect on my own lived experience, um, growing up on an island, growing up in Grenada, the first 21 or so years of my life, um, for me, it was a connection to nature, beaches and waterfalls, and
Mm,
having solace in that made a huge difference in how I was able to retreat from the world and kind of return at a calmer state, right? And if I were to think then, if I were to kind of, use my lived experience and extend it to what I saw with others around me who did the same thing, who, yeah, the beach, the waterfall. For us in the Caribbean, we use the word lime. We like to lime. A lime is, it's not anything that's really planned, but you just show up and a cook somehow goes down. There's a pot somewhere, and there's this informal gathering of community.
is it
And
like
to
a
me,
verb, like to lime? We're gonna
to
jump into
lime. So
lime?
like the actual fruit lime, like in the
Uh-huh.
Caribbean, like liming is a thing.
That's cool. I like that a lot. I never heard
It
that.
is. And it's something that happens really spontaneously. You'll hear people say, so where's a lime later? What we,
Mm,
who we liming with, right? Um, because, I mean, literally, ditto. There are days I'm driving home from work and, you could see you have 4 or 5 people who are gathered at some random spot, whether it's on our carnage or, and they just decided we're going to pull up with a few drinks. And this is our gathering. This is where we're decompressing. This is where we are finding solace. This is where we're building community. That happens sporadically all the time, right? So, and not unique to Grenada. Like people Limin, Trinidad, they Limin in Barbados. Like everyone's doing it. It's an island thing. So, like I said, I'm not sure where that narrative came from. That reflexivity. We use these words and they seem so foreign and so distant, but we can pull them back to the ways that we show up in our culture, right? And we do show up in those authentic ways in our culture, taking care of ourselves, which is why you find people in these islands and you're like, how old are you? Where's the gray hair? Because they're after that quality life. They're after that quality life. So communing with nature, Limin, those are all ways that are authentically reflexive. You know, somebody pulling a drum and starting to beat it, and everybody rhythmically kind of just moving to that and finding there's some peace in that. You don't have to pull out a yoga mat, right? To say you are engaging in mindfulness or mindful practices, right? So it is very much a part of our culture, and any and everyone can participate in those activities to help bring balance to their lives.
Wow, that is so powerful. And that right there, I think so it's vocabulary. It's what you call things. It's how you decide to name something because somebody may hear, oh, we're just lambing, and then be like, what is that? That is such a weird foreign thing. And yet when you unpack it, what does it do though? It allows you to live a life on your own terms. There's nothing more important than that. Like when somebody feels constricted and they feel like they must live according to somebody else's guidelines, that's restrictive. That freedom of I'm deciding to pull over here and join these people, grab a drink, and just be. That's already a way to give authorization to yourself to relax your shoulders and understand that you are in control of yourself.
Correct.
Then you think about something like drumming or moving your body to the sound of the drums or hearing a waterfall and letting that sound kind of carry you away or going to the beach. So for those who are listening, we're giving you examples of ways in which you can be emotionally balanced that have nothing to do with the stereotypical Western way in which you might have been introduced to these practices. So you can do this in any way that makes sense to you. So I wrote down and I mentioned liming, drumming, moving, being in community, spending time volunteering, singing together, telling stories, like stopping after work somewhere and just like telling stories. And all those things that you mentioned, they also happen back home in Cameroon. The idea that I'm done with work on a Tuesday at 5, therefore I'm home by 5:30, that's not a thing.
Yeah.
You don't know. In fact, when you ask somebody, okay, I'm going to see you this tomorrow afternoon, and they're like, what time? They're like, I don't know, because you really don't know. There's like the traffic. There's
Yeah.
you might stop by to say hi to somebody who's going to offer you a drink. It's just
Correct.
so interesting. So I love how we just reclaimed reclaimed the power that we have in our identities and our cultures when it comes to being emotionally balanced.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's not foreign to us, right? Because as you said earlier, we all have a nervous system, and that nervous system, requires a certain degree of being fed, if you will, for lack of a better word. And the things that we do in our lives, whether we realize it or not, can positively or negatively feed that nervous system. And so what we want to highlight, right, are the things that we know, when we engage this way in building community, when we engage this way in just, going for a walk on the beach, go to Grand Anse, so wherever you are in the world, when you do these things, you feel peace. And that's that regulation. So you're able, and I just think how beautiful it is, right? How beautiful it is to be present in your life, right? Where you can have a dialogue, you can have an exchange with someone and not have, which has happened to me as someone who, again, who wears multiple hats, and you have all these different identities, where you have, the list, the running list of things that need to get done, whether at work, at home, and so forth and so on. But when you're able to sort of push those to the side, right? Because you've had a really nice afternoon just laying on the beach and listening to the waves lap against, right,
Mhm.
the shore, you come back refreshed. And so I can listen to my 14-year-old and really be present, so that when she, says something about this friend or that friend, I can connect to that.
Mhm.
And I can speak from a standpoint of a working mother. Um, I think when you're someone who's in the world of work and you prioritize being a motherhood, I'm not the first to speak on this. These are not easy things, right? You wanna show her the virtues of hard work and following your passion and all of that, but at the same time, there's a need to be present,
Mhm.
for your children as working mothers, and if we can lean into those kinds of practices, this tension of being regulated and being balanced, I think we can have greater success, right? Because we're able to push aside the running list, the one that's keeping us up late at night,
Mhm.
knowing that I have to do this and I have to do that, and be present with the people that matter to us, right? So that kind of regulation to me is such a valuable investment, and the returns on that investment, right, is just unbelievable. And it's only to be experienced. It's not the type of investment that okay, this is growing in the bank, but it's only to be experienced. You feel that connection with another human being, right? So it's really, really priceless.
Yeah, so on that topic of how priceless this is and how amazing of an investment it is. So let's talk about education a
Mm-hmm.
little bit, right? So I believe that these are tools and skills that should be taught in school. I think it's great that sometimes a parent or a big brother or sister or a mentor can work with kids at home and teach them how important it is to slow down, to be present, to be emotionally balanced. But the place where most kids go every single day, 5 days a week, is school. Then you finish high school and you go to college and you go get a graduate degree. We spend so much time in education that I feel like we can do something about this within education. Now, you and I have done some work, and we've seen how difficult it can be to bring these practices into education. And I wonder what your thoughts are in terms of one, does it make sense that we would think about how to merge these tools with education, like formally? And two, how do we do that? And what are perhaps some challenges that are to be anticipated?
Yeah. Gosh, I think we would need another hour to really peel back.
Part
Um,
two.
right. Part two, the challenges that we find in education, just globally, because when we think about the learners that we have in classrooms today, I think about the brains that are in classrooms today, and those brains are very different, I believe, and the research supports me on this. All right, from the brains that were in classroom 50, 40, 30 years ago, right? We have children whose brains are wired differently, especially because of the digital nature of our world, right? And their capacity for the traditional sit still, and do this over and over and over from the beginning to the end of the day, 5 days a week, and absorb information, and you are now, on the path to moving on to be an adult. I mean, I can't imagine how that plays out in a way that keeps children engaged in school and wanting to remain in school and being able to thrive in school. I can't imagine how it does, because that's the reality, right? That is the reality. And so, yes, we have to think about the ways that we are teaching them from a pedagogical standpoint, right? We have to think about the type of curriculum that is being introduced to classrooms. And ultimately, we have to think about those brains and how they're different.
Yeah.
So what does it mean for us in education to have conversations around that? And in the upcoming summit in May, we get into transformative education in local communities. SGU will be hosting a summit in May 22nd and May 23rd, and we'll be having folks locally from the region and friends from abroad visiting us, right?
Let's go. And that would be me. I'll be there.
Correct. To have those important conversations and to figure out how we pivot a bit, because we need to pivot. I did a study in Grenada about 3 years ago that explored the student experiences, because what we found, and again, Grenada is not unique in that sense, we found that students were basically abandoning school from what we call Form 3, Form 4, and not graduating. So that trend, I'm not sure what it is in the last few years. The study was done in 2021. It actually went back to earlier. So that trend existed for a little while, and it was actually higher for boys. Again, not unique to Grenada. We're seeing that trend sort of globally, that phenomenon. And it's concerning. It's deeply, deeply, deeply concerning. And as educators, we have to be doing the thinking, doing the talking, and then trying to figure out how we disrupt, right, the systems that are not serving our children to ensure that they're really engaged. So regulation is interesting for me when I think about child development and what we should realistically expect from children, right? I think we have to honor people. That's what I think we have to do. As adults and as children, we have to honor them. So if we're going to honor children during these important years of their lives, while they're in this prepared environment that's supposed to stimulate their thinking about their curiosities that they already have about the world, we have to think about different models that we can expose them to. Right? So we have to kind of go back to the drawing board. We have to figure out how we can make learning more collaborative. We have to think about, so like I said, this is like a part 2 to really get into all the ways that we can bring balance, not just to the child, but to our educators as well. Our educators, they need support, whether it is in ensuring that they have access to good counselors on campus, whether it's in ensuring that their parents have access to good counselors on campus, right? Because you can't just look at one aspect of it, right? We have to look at the very multifaceted aspect of, what an education actually means. It's not just the child, right? So it takes a lot of work, Dido. I think it takes a lot of work to get it right, but we can in communities, small communities. Grenada is the population of Grenada is under 130,000. If we include the sister islands of Carriacou and PCMR, I think it might even be a bit less. But in what we refer to as developing nations, I think it puts us at an advantage to try different paradigms, right? Because why not? Why not? And the research tells us that what we're getting is not worth what others have done in sort of the more traditional ways of thinking about what an education is. So we have to push that envelope, and we have to come together to do that thinking, do the talking, and then figure out how we're going to implement systems that are going to be helpful to our children, to our parents, to our teachers, to everyone involved in education.
Well, there you have it. Yeah, now you know why we had to have this talk because you just heard a little bit of an infomercial for part two with Caroline because that's a big one that she and I have in common. I mean, this idea of understanding education and starting with number one, what is education for? Asking that question because we assume that we all agree on the answer, but I don't know about that, right? So we should talk about what is education for, and if
Mm-hmm.
education has anything to do with the well-being of the children, then of course we start with their brains. Like, how could we not? I mean, something as simple as knowing what happens to the brain of a teenager and matching that with the kind of schedule that we create for school, even like at what time you're supposed to be at school. Like when I taught in high school, the first high school I taught, I think 7:20.
Mm-hmm.
That was when we started classes. Like, what do you think is gonna happen to like a 17-year-old who woke up super early and gets new class at 7:20, and then they have to do math or literature or biology? I mean, it's predictable.
Correct.
It's predictable. Then you add the fact that back then when I began, all educators were anti-technology to a point where we were pretending that it was not a real thing, but like it's here. I'm not saying it has the answers to everything, but you cannot teach kids if you don't acknowledge what their context is.
Mm-hmm.
Their brains are literally different than yours and mine when we were that age. And then you have all these goals that we have for what a good education is, going to a good school, being successful. It's like we have to redefine all those things. And then the adults, the people who are supposed to be there on the line, putting everything on the line to pour into these kids. How do we look at them? How do we take care of them? How do we support them? It's such a big conversation. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm excited to have it with you because guess what? It's difficult work, but we're here for it.
We are, right? I mean, of course, I'm biased, and I think education, the work of education, is so important. I've had parents in the past who've said, I don't need you really thinking about their social and emotional well-being. I just need you to teach the math. I just need you to teach the science. I just need you to just, get the academic path straight, and I'm gonna be the one that will dabble in the all things social and emotional. And those were hard conversations to have with parents because I understand and I respect their perspective. As a parent, you get to kind of say what's best for your child. But again, we are doing this as collaborators and as partners, and we recognize that your child inevitably leaves the halls of whatever that classroom is, and then becomes a collaborator and a partner with others in the world. So those every attempt to address their social and emotional well-being is an attempt to prepare them for the real world, right? And so I think one of the taglines on one of my emails is Ubuntu, that we're made for connection,
Mhm.
right? I firmly believe that. Firmly believe that. And so it's a disservice to have children come into spaces and just see their intellect or their academic capacity and to not see them,
Mm.
to not try to connect with them. If here in at the institution, we do an exercise sometimes with faculty where we ask them to think back to this new faculty who are coming in and as part of their orientation. Think back to some of your best teaching experiences as a student, right? Where that experience was meaningful. Most times what faculty say is not that they were so wowed by the expertise of the particular teacher. What they say is what you and I will predict:
Mhm.
how engaging the lesson was because of how attentive, how kind, how It's a social emotional aspect of the learning.
It's how the teacher made them feel.
It's how the teacher made them feel. They didn't doubt their capacity to succeed. Those are the things that they remember as higher education, lecturers at this institution. And that is not the exception to the rule, right? That's not the exception. So we have to continue to prioritize that at all levels of education, whether it's in lower or upper education, K through 12, or tertiary and so forth and so on. Because, like I said before, we have to figure out how we're going to honor people, whether they're children, whether they're adults. We have to honor them and see them first, validate them first, right? Because that creates the type of environment that feels safe, where they can take risks, they can fail, and no failure is wonderful in this space, because that's what learning is about, right? When we do that work, then we can see people thriving and innovating and doing all the things that we need from learners in any kind of a learning environment.
Well, I will have that be the last word. Let's honor people and honor ourselves first. So there you have it, Dr. Caroline Henry, aka Doc. I am so grateful for you and for all the work you're doing. This is definitely one that we have to dig deeper into together. I'm looking forward to being there in person on the island so we can go lime together. We're gonna be liming. I'm gonna take that. I'm gonna add that to the repertoire of the ways of practicing
Yeah.
emotion regulation that are connected to our culture, liming. Thank you so much. This is gonna be super useful to people, and I can't wait to get some feedback on this episode. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much for having me. As I predicted, this was another fun exchange. Constantly learning from you. I just want to go on record here and thank you for being such a wonderful collaborator with St. George's University in the ways that you've showed up to guest lecture in our Master of Education program, in the ways that you've showed up to do mindful leadership with our faculty, and even beyond the work that you've done with our teachers, our K through 12 teachers in the various programs that I've led. You have been such an asset to the institution and to Grenada, and I'm excited for continued collaboration to bring what I believe is such a needed aspect of education for all, not just folks who are in K through 12, but really for all. So thank you so much for your continued collaboration. I appreciate it.
I'm taking it. I appreciate you.
All right, take care. See you soon.
Thank you so much for listening to Emotionally Balanced with Dido Balla. I really hope you learned something useful and practical today. You learned at least one tool that you can use in your life to remain more emotionally balanced. Please remember that we are dropping these every single week, so share them with your friends, with your family, and everybody that you know. Also, check us out on Instagram at Balance with Balla. We are dropping some clips from the episodes there and also some additional content. And more importantly, please remember to leave a review if you get a chance. Once again, thanks for tuning in. Stay emotionally balanced. Bye.